All right, Nastia, I always like to ask this question. It's open-ended, go in whatever direction you'd like with it. But when you think back to your childhood, what are the things that make you smile, that stand out, maybe things that really kind of pushed you to where you are today? Any direction you'd like to go, but what do you think about when you think back to your childhood?
Honestly, thinking back to my childhood, I mean, so much of my time and my childhood was filled with something that I just loved so much, and that was gymnastics. And, I'm obviously so fortunate that gymnastics has kind of given me the life that I have today, but taking a step back and actually like looking back at it, like I truly just loved it so much. I had such a passion for it. And, my parents really never wanted me to do gymnastics because they knew how hard it was, I guess, and just the amount of hours and all of that you're spending in the gym and being the only child, they just truly wanted me to be happy. And that happiness truly came from the sport of gymnastics at such an early age.
And you reference your parents, both incredibly accomplished in that field on a global level. But you said they didn't necessarily want you to do that. Did you have to convince them that this was a life you wanted to pursue, or were they pretty easy to kind of relent and let you do your thing?
I guess a little bit of both. My mom was pretty adamant about me trying other things. Like, she really, really wanted me to play the piano, and I specifically remember her taking me to piano lessons, which obviously took away the time, and the hours that I was able to be in the gym. And every single lesson that she took me to, I literally cried, and I just wanted to be back in the gym. And I just kept telling her how much I hated, my lessons and how I would never be a piano player. And she was like, "That's okay. Like, you don't have to be a successful piano player, but I want you to try." And so I, tried for not long, but, I tried. And, I just kind of realized that this wasn't for me. And I think she realized that too. And I guess it wasn't so much like convincing them to let me do it. I was in the gym so much because when we moved to Texas from Russia, basically, they just had this dream, and that dream was to open up a gymnastics school one day. And at the time when we moved here, none of us could speak English. They really didn't have any money. They just had a dream and a little baby. And so they couldn't afford a babysitter. And so I just spent so much of my time in the gym. And for me, it was so amazing because it was, this huge playground. And then I just quickly fell in love with the sport beyond it just being this big playground for me. And I think I convinced them when they truly just saw, the passion in my eyes and the love for the sport. And then obviously at a pretty early age, they definitely saw, a God-given talent, and they didn't want to take that away from me, but they also just, were never going to force or push me into the sport. But luckily for them, I fell in love with it pretty early.
So you mentioned, you weren't born in America, and your parents, their heritage is not American. And I was born here, but my family, my brothers and parents were born in South Africa. So I grew up experiencing, I guess, a little bit of an American upbringing, but a lot of a South African upbringing. And I'm curious, what sort of cultural experiences did you have, even as you moved to America, with your parents not being from here, that maybe the average American kid would not have growing up, or the ones, I'm sure there are several, the ones that really kind of stood out to you?
It's so hard to say because we moved when I was about 2.5 years old. So for me, Dallas is home and America is home. Like, yeah, I certainly feel, Russia is like still part of who I am because it is a big part of my family, obviously. But I feel like, culturally, like maybe eating like different food, having different recipes. Like, for instance, today for lunch, my grandma is, my grandparents live here now too. And so she made borscht, which is a very traditional Russian soup. But other than that, like, I feel like because I basically grew up in Texas in the United States, we really kind of took on the traditions of being an American family. And so I wouldn't really necessarily say it was different. That being said, just being able to learn more about their upbringing and how, how they grew up and how the times were so different and so much more difficult, I guess, in the Soviet Union at the time, and how, they had to stand in line for literally hours just to get, a few potatoes, let alone any kind of meat. And so that kind of stuff, I feel like I grew to truly have an appreciation, again, for the life that I live today and how I'm so fortunate. And they have obviously worked so extremely hard to give me that life, from my teenage years, and then to be able to obviously be successful in the sport of gymnastics. And that, has kind of led me. But I think really just seeing how hard they worked, both for their family and for their dreams. But, I think the older that I've gotten, the more I understand it and the more I appreciate it, because I know how hard that is, especially like thinking, okay, just imagining myself moving to a country that I don't speak the language and I just have this dream. It's scary, it's obviously not impossible, and they have shown me that, but it's, I feel like I've just grown to like truly appreciate hard work and coming from nothing and really working for everything that you have.
Do you recall challenges in learning English? I mean, you were so young, so I mean, was it just done in school, or how did you go about, I guess, with your family as well, learning English?
Yeah, well, we actually, my parents and I always watched Barney and Sesame Street, and that's really how we all kind of learned English. Obviously, once I started going to school, I, was learning there, and I would bring home, all my books and homework and kind of all that stuff. And they would honestly kind of do it with me, because that was their way of learning as well. So yeah, it was a big team and family effort. And, but I mean, the early days, definitely it was watching, Barney and Sesame Street.
I could be wrong. I think Barney was filmed in Dallas.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I always heard that, but I guess I never really thought to follow up on that. But
I think you are right.
Okay,
I don't know. I don't really know the logistics of it beyond it being on our TV, but yeah, I think you might be right.
I didn't, I never saw Barney like at a Tom Thumb or a grocery store, so
Right.
I guess I just didn't believe it. Nastia, to do what you did as a gymnast, and I guess, right off the bat, when you talked about your parents understanding what that life was like, you certainly have a different childhood, a different path than a lot of people, because of the time commitment and the age at which you kind of excel and peak as a gymnast. What were some of the experiences, or what did you do to try and make sure you still had some of the experiences that kids, I guess are prone to having at those ages? Or were you just totally, to compete at the level you competed, did you just have to kind of block all that out and consider that a sacrifice to have the success that you ended up having?
Yeah, I mean, there were certainly sacrifices that I had to make. I mean, but at the same time, I was so driven to, I guess, achieve the goals that I had, that yes, I knew that they were sacrifices, but I also just always knew in the back of my mind that, okay, something I might be sacrificing, for instance, not going to the sleepover tonight with some of my school friends because I have practice at 8 a.m. the next morning. And it wasn't that my parents didn't let me do those things. They really kind of let me do, if I asked to go to a sleepover, they were like, okay, here's the thing. Like, we know you're probably not going to get a lot of sleep. You have practice at 8 a.m. tomorrow. You're going to be tired, but if you want to go, like, you should go. And I, definitely went and learned the lesson the hard way. I would have the worst practice of my entire life because I was exhausted, and I've just always been one that needs my sleep. And so I think just from such an early age, I kind of like learned myself that, okay, you have the rest of your life to have sleepovers with your friends. You have the rest of your life to go to the mall, to, go to movies and do all that. And that's not to say like I didn't do those things. I would just, not be able to do those on Friday night because I had practice Saturday morning. But Saturdays, after practice in the morning, I had basically a day and a half Sundays were our days off. So I think, yes, certainly the sacrifices were there. We didn't really go on a lot of family vacations till after. But again, now we have, for the most part, a very normal family life, and we're able to enjoy so much of that and I guess kind of make up for lost time. But while it was a sacrifice, like, I don't regret a single day, a single hour or moment that I spent training, because I was able to achieve, this lifelong dream that I had throughout my childhood, basically at the Olympics.
So I think one thing that's unique about your trajectory, there are maybe NBA players who are around the same age as you when the 2008 Olympics popped up. But the Olympics it's not just USA watching. It feels like the whole world is watching. And to have that pressure and to be in the spotlight at the age you were at, whether it was the lead up to the Olympics or the actual '08 games, what was that like? Was that a challenge to have that spotlight and have that attention? Was it something maybe because of your parents and their experiences that you were prepared for, or how did you kind of deal with the spotlight at a relatively young age?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's definitely on a whole different level, I would say, here than in, the Soviet Union at the time, or Russia. But I think I was pretty lucky that I grew up in the era of no social media, because I look at, these young girls now that are, whether they're athletes or not, it's just, it's a tough day and age, I feel like, to grow up and to be, whether living or training for the Olympics or competing at the Olympics, with everybody's opinions just at your fingertips. But that being said, I do feel very fortunate that, my dad, having competed at the Olympics, he kind of knew exactly what it took. And so him being my coach, I mean, I had just like full faith and trust in him. And I never once questioned if he told me, not that he ever did, but if he told me I had to do 100 beam routines that day, like, that's what I would do, because I knew that his word was just, he was doing everything he possibly could to get me to where I needed to be, because we had that same goal and dream together. And we were a team, and we were teammates, really. But I feel like the spotlight for me was just something, honestly, that I kind of ignored a little bit. Like, I was able to block it out really well, because it was almost like I just separated, two different things. It was my training for the Olympics, and then it was just like this other side of my life, I guess. I don't know. Like, my mom just always really kind of taught me to like, when I was competing and I was on the balance beam or just like in that competition zone, to pretend like I was a horse at a horse race and put my blinders on, right? And so it was like there were no other distractions. And I was just very lucky and fortunate to have a great team that helped me with all the other stuff in my family and all of that. So I guess I didn't really realize or notice it or recognize it as much until after the Olympics and after I came home. And then I certainly realized, the amount of people watching the Olympics and just like the magnitude of it. I think I just always kind of thought like, oh yeah, like a lot of people watch the Olympics, but I didn't really realize how many and how big of a deal it was.
And, I think it's such a unique event because it brings sports fans and non-sports fans together, and maybe sports fans who aren't familiar with certain sports, including gymnastics. But yeah. I think from an athlete standpoint, Nastia, what's so amazing is, and you probably know the name Dirk Nowitzki, being someone.
Oh gosh, of course, I'm a huge fan of his.
I mean, we all are. I'm trying to convince my wife that maybe we name our first kid Dirk. I'm losing that battle right now, but so the Mavericks in '06 lost the finals and then came back in 2011 and won and made up for a heartbreaking moment. Well, for you as a gymnast, you might only have one shot, and whether that's trying to qualify or when the actual event takes place, I just find that pressure, that level of pressure, so amazing because you work so hard and you make all these sacrifices, and there isn't a next year. For some athletes, maybe there's 4 years from now, but that's a long time. I'm just curious, like, what was that like? And and knowing that pressure's there, but I'm sure you can't let that pressure hang over you every single day. So how did you deal with that?
Well, you know, you're exactly right. And this is kind of something that I've always said. Like, I'm obviously a huge gymnastics fan, Olympics fan, but just a sports fan overall. And I feel like I never, ever want to take away or compare, because you just can't. You know, you can't compare the NBA or the NHL or NFL to each other, or, you know, even to gymnastics or the Olympics. But, you know, you are right. Like, the NBA finals, it happens every year, and it's heartbreaking no matter what if you're that close. And you can tell yourself, okay, well, maybe, you know, we can rebound and come back next year. But still, it's like that pain is still there. But, you know, you're right. For the Olympics, especially for so many, including myself, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I had peaked, you know, my whole 18 years basically for that one moment, that, you know, the day of all-around finals where I won that gold medal. And so it's really hard not to think this is my one and only chance, because you know that it is. You know, it's like you're never going to be as, you know, powerful, strong, physically, mentally, emotionally prepared than you are in that one very moment. But you have to kind of do the best that you can to not think those things, because that's, you know, or else you're setting yourself up for basically disappointment. And I've always just kind of said, like, you know, I was obviously physically more prepared than I ever was in my entire life in Beijing, but it really was about that mental game. Okay, and can I, yes, deliver my routines, because I know that I can. I've done like a million beam routines, and it really is just one more. But it's that one more that counts for an Olympic gold medal, you know? So it really becomes such a mental game. And as much physical training as I did, you know, on my own. I really did do a lot of mental training, and I read so many books, and I visualized, and just a lot of things to kind of mentally prepare myself for that moment.
And, you know, the Olympics on the gymnastics side, as people know, is unique as well, in that in some capacities it's a team sport, but you're also now competing with your teammates, and you know, in other capacities. So what's that dynamic like, knowing that you've got a team, and in some areas you really work together as a team, and how you perform and how a teammate performs is all towards the greater good, but then the next day you guys might be rivals going for the same medal.
Yeah, I feel like there's not too many sports like that, you know, where it is such an individual sport, yet it is a team sport at the same time. I will have to say, though, like, our Olympic team is, like, so close now, and it's so cool because, you know, we definitely experienced something at such a young age, but we experienced something that we now have a bond together for the rest of our lives, and we're all in such different places in our personal lives, you know, whether a lot of the girls have families and kids and are married, or just we're at such different places, but it's so cool because we're just, like, connected forever. And I feel like it's definitely at times challenging to kind of, like, understand, you know, being teammates, but then also being rivals. But I feel like, you know, especially at such a, like, we were 16, 17, 18 years old. But I think at the end of the day, we all truly wanted what was best for each other. And that was obviously for us all to do the very best we could, both individually and as teammates. And so I feel like I feel like looking back, like we did a really good job at trying to support each other. And there was never, ever that feeling of, or, you know, the thought, like, I hope someone messes up so I can make this final or anything like that. It was never about that. It was always truly, we each want each other to do our best because that's who, you know, deserves to be in that final or to win that medal or whatnot.
And you won a few medals in 2008, a handful of medals, including a gold in the all-around. And I mean, years later, years removed, I'm sure that's still an incredibly special memory. How would you characterize your feelings as best as you can recall when you realized I am a gold medalist?
Oh, it's hard to kind of like, it's just not part of my everyday life anymore. Like, I don't wake up thinking about the Olympics or, about the medals that I won. Like, don't get me wrong, I will forever be so, so proud and thankful, you know, to be able to have competed at the Olympics and represented my country. But I feel like also like now being back home in Dallas, it certainly does bring back more memories, probably more than ever before. But I feel like when I do think about it, if anything, it just kind of is like that motivating factor of, okay, I got through some of the hardest of times, the most frustrating, the most difficult and challenging times. And I was able to overcome so much adversity and fear and so many different things in order to achieve, that ultimate goal. So anytime, something else kind of in like real life, I guess, kind of if I do face adversity or I'm going through something challenging, I'm like, okay, if I did that, I can do this and I can get through that. So I feel like it certainly has given me confidence in knowing that if you can do this, you can do that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just so fortunate and lucky that I have been able to kind of create a career out of something that I truly just fell in love with at such an early age. I mean, I was probably, 3, 4, 5 years old when I fell in love with the sport. And now being 30 years old, I'm still so involved in the Olympic movement and the sport of gymnastics. And so it's really cool.
I would never suggest that winning a gold medal is a bad thing, but hearing the way you started that answer, talking about how it's not like you allow it to live in your head every second of the day. I mean, you've gone on to accomplish a lot, and maybe some of it is possible because of your success. But have you at any point had to deal with, man, I'm so proud of what I did, and I understand it's a tremendous accomplishment, but I'd love to just be Nastia Liukin, not Nastia Liukin, the gold medalist. I don't know, and maybe that's never happened. I'm just curious.
Oh no, I mean it happens. I don't know if this is like dramatic to say that it happens on a day-to-day basis, but it certainly happens more often than not. I again am so thankful and so fortunate that I was able to achieve, the things that I was able to achieve. But I feel like for so long, that kind of defined who I was as a person. And I feel like now at 30, I've kind of finally learned, but it took me a very long time. And there's still instances that that kind of still hits me, but I feel like at this point in my life, I have finally figured out not even who Nastia Liukin is, just who Nastia is, because that's really what I have been itching so hard to kind of figure that out and find out who that person is. And that's kind of the person that I want, people to know more than, who Nastia, the Olympic gold medalist is, the girl in the stars, all of those things. And so, but again, I also understand that gymnastics and the Olympics, will forever be part of who I am. And that's okay. I just really don't want that to define who I am.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, I guess, what would you like people to know about Nastia? And I'm not even going to mention the last name, just Nastia, as we have a conversation about it right now.
I think for me, it's more so the person that I am. My mom kind of always taught me that people will kind of forget about your accomplishments and the medals that you won, but people will never forget the way that you make them feel and just the kind of person that you are. So I hope that people know and remember, or if, people meet me, that it's beyond just oh yeah, she has 5 Olympic medals. It was just, oh, she was really kind and sweet and her heart was great, and that type of thing. I really want to make a difference in people's lives beyond just, remembering me for my accomplishments in the sport of gymnastics.
And I guess, and maybe, we can refer to you not as Nastia, the gold medalist, but the college graduate. I know you went back to
Yes.
NYU and got your degree. I think I saw in psych and sports management. Why was that important to you? And then with those specific uh, degrees, what was appealing about each of those? The sports management side, I guess maybe there's some more natural connections, but the psych side as well.
So for me, it was just always extremely important to go back to school. I graduated high school in 2007, so the year before the Olympics. And, my dad from a very early age, before I really even understood, what he was saying, but I just specifically remember him telling me, and I was probably like in middle school then, but he said, you never know how far your gymnastics career is going to take you, but an education will stick with you for the rest of your life. So promise me at some point in your life, you're going to go to school, college, and you're going to get a degree. And so, being however old I was at that time, I was just like, yeah, Dad, sure, whatever you say, whatever makes you happy. But I always kind of had that in the back of my mind. And I always knew that was important to him and both my parents, really. But the older I got, the more I realized, like, how accurate that was, that, I don't know how far my gymnastics career, is going to take me. And I now being 30 and looking back, and, it really is incredible. But at the same time, like, I am so happy that I went to school because I learned so much, both, within my degrees, but also just with life, moving from Dallas, for a little bit, like, and moving to New York, and people not knowing who I was there. I didn't know I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody there. It was like probably the best thing that I could have done, because that was like the first step in just trying to figure out who Nastia was and not who, this Olympic gymnast was. And no one really cared who I was. And it was great. And it was just it was a huge, like, growing phase for me, I feel like. And it also made me appreciate coming home so much more. I have always loved Dallas, and it has always been home, but I feel like it wasn't until I moved away that I was like, oh, wow, okay, yes, it for sure is home.
Well, I'm curious, you got so much ahead of you in life, and you're involved in so much, and I want to get into some of that, but what's something you'd like to learn, or something you'd like to try, or something you'd like to get involved with now that, I don't want to say you've got all the time in the world, because I know you are actively doing things, but, now that you're post-athletic career, and you're continuing to learn what you like to do and what you want to do, what's something you'd like to try that you've not tried before?
I mean, gosh, so much, but like little things like learning a third language has always been something that I've wanted to do. And I just want to kind of continue making a difference, both in the gymnastics world, in my local community, which is obviously Dallas, and just the next generation, whether, it's young women wanting to be athletes, lawyers, doctors, whatever. I was so lucky that I had so many incredible mentors throughout my life. And so now, but I know not everybody has, the access that I had, with my parents being world and Olympic champions. I mean, some of my biggest idols throughout my gymnastics career, I would come home and they were like just sitting on my couch, So I feel like obviously that's not normal, but because of, my parents and their friends within the gymnastics world, like, that was my norm. And so I just basically kind of want to, mentor and inspire and encourage this next generation in whatever it is that they want to do, and just really trying to be the best version of themselves. It's not necessarily about how to become an Olympic gold medalist. Like, that's not what life is about. It truly is just finding something that you're passionate about and being, the best you that you can be.
Nastia, I'm curious, whether it's what you've done post athletics or even during your time there, I imagine leadership is a big part of the equation, and what you just talked about, in what you'd like to do, and being an influence, and being a leader, and serving in that role. What's important to you in accomplishing that, and connecting with people and being a leader, whether it's in an athletic arena or something totally different?
It is important, and I feel like, I'm obviously thankful for the platform that I have, both, digitally, I guess, social media or whatever, but also just outside of that. And so I feel like if I'm able to just make a difference and help, whether it's a young girl or woman or even anybody really, I feel I have just had so many amazing leaders that I've been able to be connected to. And so if I have learned something throughout my career, whether that's, on the gymnastics floor or not, and I'm able to be able to give back, and again, whether that's some kind of technical piece of advice in gymnastics and in the sport, or, something outside of that, then I just feel like I feel really eager to want to do that and to continue to do that. And so I don't necessarily know, too much of what like the future holds, but I do know that that is a huge goal of mine, and a huge passion of mine to continue doing that.
All right, a couple more questions, and then we'll let you go. The first one, so on your website, I know there's lots of health and wellness and lifestyle stuff, so I need your help with two things. One, I've really tried to get into cooking lately, and I like my food. My wife sometimes likes my food, and that might be generous, but what's a recipe you've tried recently that you would recommend, and what's a TV show that you're watching? Because gosh knows that with all this free time, people have been exhausting every TV show imaginable.
Good questions. I have gotten into cooking. I love baking. One of my really good friends is a pastry chef, and so I've been texting with her, following some of her recipes. Let's see. For Mother's Day, I made brunch for my family. So I did like a shakshuka, like this. It's like an Israeli Middle Eastern kind of meal, I guess, with like poached eggs, and I had prosciutto in it. Let's see. Tonight I'm making lettuce wraps, or like chicken lettuce wraps, I guess.
Yeah.
I've just been really, my parents are like so pleasantly surprised, I think, because I've been hiding this talent. Let's like delete the word talent, because I wouldn't necessarily say I'm like talented, but I think every time I used to come home, it would just be for like quick visits. And so now, officially being back here in Dallas, and especially now during, quarantine times, I have been cooking a lot more. And they're like, wait a second, like, where did this come from? Like, we had no idea that you knew how to cook. If we knew this, like, you'd be on duty for dinner, like, a few times a week. And I was like, no, like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. But yeah, I definitely enjoy learning new things. And I think especially just because while I was training and traveling so much of my life, like, whether it was an excuse or not, I, kind of told myself I don't have time, but now we all have a little bit more time. In terms of TV, to be completely honest, since I've been home, I haven't turned the TV on once to watch a show, which I know sounds so crazy. But yeah, I mean, like, my dad is a huge tennis fan, so the tennis channel is always on in the background here. Again, we're huge sports fans, so I'm hopefully, fingers crossed, sports can pick back up here soon. But I haven't watched too much TV. I feel like the first 2 weeks maybe of quarantine, I watched Schitt's Creek. So I did not get through all 6 or 7 seasons. I think I got through the first season, but I've never really been a huge like TV show kind of person. I don't know why. I'm more of like a live TV person.
That works for me. I am very impressed that you've had restraint on the TV. I wish that I could say the same, but I have failed miserably in that regard.
Which is not a bad thing. Like, no judgment, to any person that has spent hours and hours watching TV shows.
All right, last thing. In 2015, you released your autobiography, Finding My Shine, and I always think reflection is really healthy and valuable, and I imagine that there was a lot of reflection that went into releasing and creating that autobiography. So beyond just saying that you've got an autobiography, in terms of the process of getting from A to B, what was so rewarding, or what was something that maybe, gosh, you learned about yourself or remembered about yourself, and having to rack your brain for the content that's needed to create an autobiography?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's really interesting. Obviously, I'm proud of that, but because it has been 5 years now, I was just thinking about that recently, that I feel like so much happened in the first, I guess, 25 years of my life, but I feel like the last 5 years of my life, I have maybe learned even more lessons these last 5 years, and more so just like life lessons than before. So kind of thinking back on it, like, I don't know, maybe it's time for round 2 or something, just because, I think at age 25, I thought I knew a lot. And at 30, I feel like I know a lot more, yet I still don't know enough. And so, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it was obviously a really cool process, but I would love to kind of like revisit that and, maybe do round 2 soon.
I mean, I think since you're not watching TV, this seems like a great time to jump into that.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Nastia, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much. And it's been really cool being from Dallas and being a part of that really important graduating class of 2007, to see what you've accomplished and to see what you've accomplished not only as an athlete but since then. And we appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it as well.